This episode of Amateur Traveler is sponsored by Thrifty Traveler Premium. Travel more for less. Amateur Traveler, episode 871. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about a slot canyon and the Blue Hole, monasteries and a holy mountain, a hidden church, and the pyramids, as we go to Egypt and Mount Sinai. This is Chris Christensen from Amateur Traveler. Let's talk about Egypt. I'd like to welcome to the show Greg from thepresentperspective.com, who's come to talk to us about a little different itinerary than we've done for the past for Egypt. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
And first of all, what's your connection with Egypt?
Yeah, very little. I studied Arabic in college, and that's about as close as my ties get. I'm just an avid traveler who was blown away by Egypt.
That is closer than many of us.
That's fair. Yeah, I'm just an avid traveler who was blown away by Egypt, and I just got back last month. So,
excellent. Why should someone go to Egypt?
I think there are a million reasons why someone should go to Egypt. Warm and hospitable people, great culture. Egyptian history, obviously, is vast, and it's one of the oldest civilizations in the world. And there's so much to see in Upper Egypt, in Cairo. There's just an endless wealth of treasures to explore. But when we visited Egypt, we decided to go a little bit off of the traditional route that a lot of tourists go. It's not that we weren't interested in going to Luxor and Aswan and doing a Nile cruise, but we enjoy history, but we're not history buffs. And I think to us, there was enough ancient history in Cairo. So while Luxor would have been great to visit, we had enough of a time with Egyptian history in Cairo with the pyramids and Saqqara and all of that. So we decided to go a different route, and instead of heading south, head east. So we headed into the Sinai Peninsula.
Excellent. And I think we've covered why. Let's jump into your itinerary. What are you going to recommend for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think almost any Egyptian itinerary is going to start or end, or maybe both, in Cairo. And that's because Cairo has the biggest airport in the country. It's the biggest hub by far. And most international flights, especially outside of Europe and the Middle East, are going to pass through Cairo first. So my itinerary starts in Cairo, where I recommend spending about 4 days. Any itinerary through Cairo has to go to the pyramids. The pyramids are absolutely epic, and I've been to 5 of the 7 new wonders of the world. The pyramids are the only existing ancient wonder of the world, the only remaining ancient wonder of the world. And I will honestly say they smoke every one of the new wonders of the world I've been to. I've been to every one of the new wonders of the world except for Machu Picchu and Petra. And the pyramids are in a league of their own. I expected them to be much smaller. I expected the Giza Plateau to be less enjoyable, maybe more congested. And during our trip, we were honestly very shocked by what we found. The pyramids were massive. From miles away, they looked massive. A lot of times, like you go to Chichen Itza in Mexico, and it is a beautiful complex to explore. But it's 10 stories high, maybe 15 stories high.
Sure.
Whereas the pyramids are over 300 feet tall. So they're twice the size of the biggest pyramid at Chichen Itza. So I recommend going to the pyramids, the Sphinx.
And just because we have people who are like me, who listen to the show, pyramids technically in Giza, but right there in the Cairo area, it's practically one city.
Yes, you're very right about that. Giza is more or less a suburb of Cairo, located on the western bank of the Nile. And something that I do recommend is actually spending a couple of nights in Giza. So a lot of people prefer to stay in Cairo because it's more centrally located to Coptic Cairo, Islamic Cairo, New Cairo, Giza. It's in the heart of everything. But something that I really recommend is staying in Giza. And there are a few reasons for that. One, the traffic isn't too bad in the morning, but if you're staying half an hour away from the Giza Plateau, it's going to get backed up. And something I did learn, even visiting during the low season, is that the Giza Plateau, which is where the pyramids and the Sphinx are located, gets very congested as time goes on. But if you visit earlier in the day, it's a ghost town. There's nobody there. We got there right when it opens. I think it's around 8 o'clock, 7:30 in the morning. Something like that, and probably no more than 100 people for the first couple hours on the entire Giza Plateau, which is a couple square miles. So I highly recommend that, and if you stay in Giza, you can get to the Giza Plateau within 5 minutes from your hotel.
Sure, yep. Quite possibly you can see the pyramids from your hotel.
We actually stayed at the Marriott Mena House. It's a former presidential palace the King's Palace, something
Okay.
along those lines. It's a former palace property that was converted into a hotel. And it's become this iconic place to stay at the foot of the pyramids. And from our room, we had a big balcony that opened up with a pure view, uninterrupted, of the Great Pyramid, the Pyramid of Khufu. So I highly recommend staying there. It's a little pricey, but honestly, I think it was worth every penny. The service was great, and the view of the pyramid, it was just breathtaking to wake up and watch the sun rise over the pyramids.
Cool. But you're not just going to do the pyramids and then leave. So you've got more planned for us here.
Absolutely. So I think you need a full day to truly see the pyramids. And a
Okay.
lot of people, they'll book a full day tour that goes to the pyramids and then it stops down to Saqqara, which is about half an hour south. But I think that such iconic destinations deserve more time. And I think they should be explored more slowly. Part of this might be because we took our toddler, and when you have a toddler, things move a little more slowly. But
Okay.
we spent a full day from 7:30 in the morning until 4 p.m. just on the Giza Plateau itself. That doesn't include going to Saqqara. That doesn't include going to the ancient city of Memphis, which are great places located within an hour of the Great Pyramids of Giza. I think the pyramids of Giza and the Sphinx alone are worth a full day. And after that, it's highly recommended that you go to Saqqara and you go to the ancient city of Memphis. A lot
Well,
of
and we haven't said
Egyptologists.
what you're seeing in Saqqara, but you got the step pyramid in Saqqara. Are there other things you're seeing there?
So the step pyramid in Saqqara is the biggest thing to see there. A lot of
Okay.
Egyptologists will tell you that it's their favorite pyramid. In fact, our tour guide was very adamant. We initially didn't plan on going to Saqqara, but he was so adamant that we go because he said it's much, much more impressive than the Great Pyramids of Giza. So we went
Hmm.
there, and I think that's the biggest thing to do. But just being in the presence of the ancient city of Memphis, which at one point was the capital of the Egyptian Empire, is a really powerful experience.
Okay.
So from Giza, I recommend going back into Cairo. I think it's worth spending a couple of nights in Cairo. So again, a couple of nights in Giza, a couple of nights in Cairo. And in Cairo, I think it's a must to check out Coptic Cairo. A lot of travelers pass that by and simply pass through, see the pyramids, and head on to their next destination within Egypt. But I think that Coptic Cairo is really cool. Islamic Cairo is really cool. But one of our favorite experiences in Cairo was St. Simon the Tanner Monastery. So this monastery is built into caves on Mount Makatam,
Okay.
located outside of the suburb of Cairo called Garbage City. So Garbage City is a suburb that was basically created when all of the trash collectors of Cairo were placed into one suburb. So the city administrators organized all of the trash collectors into one city because the trash smells so bad that they wanted to constrain that smell into one area of the city. So all of the trash collectors back in the 70s were moved into Garbage City. To get to St. Simon the Tanner Monastery, you pass through Garbage City, and our tour guide told us you don't want to put the windows down because apparently it is just the worst stench you'll ever smell. But as you exit out the other side of the suburb, you get to this monastery, which is just epic. It's carved into the rock. So basically, the way the story starts about St. Simon the Tanner Monastery is back in the year 979, the current Caliph of Egypt, as well as the Coptic patriarch of the area and a Jewish scholar, were having a heated debate. The Caliph quoted Matthew 17:20, saying that if Christianity were true, then Patriarch Abram should be able to move an entire mountain based on his faith of a mustard seed. The patriarch had a vision of the Virgin Mary, telling him where to find a holy man named Simon to complete the task. After 3 days of prayer and fasting, the legend says that the mountain separated from the ground and the Egyptian people could see the sun rise below the mountain. And when they went to visit, the mountain was moved a couple of kilometers over to the side. A church was built and it was lost for over 1,000 years. Then in the 1970s, when the people living in Garbage City went to the area, they were cleaning out some trash and they saw a carving of the Virgin Mary and the baby Jesus on the roof of this cave. And as they dug out all of the trash, they realized this was an ancient church from 1,000 years prior. So since then, they built this epic monastery. They found all of these caves, and they've been building up different churches in the caves. And it's turned into one of the most popular places to visit in Cairo.
Okay. And I had not heard about this at all when I was in Cairo.
Yeah, and it's a short drive from Coptic Cairo, a short drive from
Hmm.
downtown Cairo, El Tahrir Square. probably about 20 minutes. So it's very close, very convenient to visit.
Okay. Cool.
So that wraps up our time in Cairo. And from Cairo, I recommend we head to the town of St. Catherine. There are two ways that you can get there. St. Catherine is most notable because it's basically the base camp of Mount Sinai. So to get to St. Catherine, you can either arrange private transportation from Cairo, which takes about 5.5 hours in a car, passes over the Suez Canal, or you can fly to Sharm el-Sheikh International Airport and then arrange transportation from there, which is about 2.5 hours.
Okay.
In St. Catherine, where I recommend staying for about 2 days, the biggest thing to do is hike Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is one of the holiest mountains in the world, according to all three Abrahamic faiths. So Jewish people, Muslim people, and Christians all believe that Mount Sinai is one of the holiest places. It's where Moses received the Ten Commandments. And this hike is one of the most unbelievable hikes that we've ever gone on. We're not big hikers. We enjoy getting outdoors. But one thing we do really like to do is go for a good sunrise hike. And Mount Sinai, there aren't words to describe how beautiful the sunrise is. The landscape is so striking in every direction. And when we finally got to the peak, you could see the sun rising on one side and the moon setting on the other. And in the distance, you see nothing but sand and mountains. And it's absolutely wild. Mount Sinai, to hike to the peak, is about 2.5 miles each way. And at the end of that 2.5 miles, there's an additional 750 stairs that are carved into the rock. These stairs are called the Steps of Atonement because, one, they're pretty hard, and you feel like you're atoning for something as you go to the top. And two, they were carved by a monk, legend says, that was atoning for his sins. I was a little bit skeptical about the climb because, again, we were bringing our toddler, and I was like, man, I'm not sure how this is going to go. But the trail is like a really smooth grade the whole way up, very wide. There's a brick wall along the side to where it's a very safe climb. And as you make your way up the trail, if you run out of energy, you can hire a camel. You can take a camel all the way to the top of the camel trail. And additionally, if you need something to eat or something to drink, there are Bedouin tea houses dotted all along the way up. These tea houses sell water, they sell coffee. If you haven't had Arabic coffee, you need to. It's great with cardamom. And I think something that was really special that was recommended to us, as simple as it was, they made this local bread with this fresh flour, and they put Nutella inside. And it was the perfect snack because One thing to know about hiking Mount Sinai is that the most popular time to do it is overnight. A lot of people think that this is because of the heat. They think you're in Egypt, you're in the Sinai Desert, so you're hiking at 2 a.m. to escape the heat. Fact of the matter is that's not really the case because the altitude is so high to where it's already only 70, 80 degrees most months of the year. The big reason is to catch the sunrise. The sunrise is just so beautiful in every direction. So as you're heading up at 2 a.m, you're probably going to be short on sleep. Our Bedouin guide had already hiked the mountain once that day, so this was his second time going up. Like with a lot of things in the Sinai Peninsula, you can't go up unless you have a local guide accompany you. He was a little tired as well, so we stopped, we grabbed coffee.
And you were not doing the sunrise hike?
We were.
Yes. Sorry, you were not doing the pre-sunrise, see sunrise at the top hike.
Yes, we left at 2 a.m, and the goal is to get to Yes. So
it was his second hike. All right.
Yes. So our guide had friends visiting from out of town, and he wanted to take his friends to the peak during that day. So they went up during the daytime, and they came down around 9 p.m., and he told us he had gotten 3 hours of sleep, and then he met us to head back up to the top of the mountain. And again, this is an intense hike. It's not crazy terrain, but it's 2.5 miles each way. There's some altitude gain, and the 750 steps at the end are definitely something. So I was pretty amazed by his athletic ability to be able to do this twice in one day, because I know by the time we were done, it was a pretty tiring experience. So at the top of the mountain, there is an Orthodox church and a mosque. Very beautiful buildings, both of them. There aren't very many peaks in Egypt that are taller than Mount Sinai. So as you're standing on the very summit, you can't get any higher. You can just see in miles in every direction. At the foot of Mount Sinai, one of the oldest monasteries in the entire world is located. It was built in the 400s AD. St. Catherine's Monastery is a Greek Orthodox monastery, and honestly, it feels like a little town picked up out of Italy or Spain. You wouldn't expect that being in the remote desert in Sinai, but it is just a beautiful property, and it's so peaceful and tranquil. So a lot of people that visit Mount Sinai come from one of the nearby resort towns of Sharm el-Sheikh or Dahab. But what we opted to do and what we recommend is actually spending 2 days in St. Catherine's. You can stay at the monastery itself, and they have a guest house located just off of the main gate of the monastery. The
Okay.
guest house isn't very luxurious or lavish,
It's
but
not like the Marriott in Giza.
it's not like the Marriott in Giza,
Okay.
but it does the job. And I think the views and just the tranquility that you find being at this monastery that's hundreds of miles away from everything is just wild. So I recommend staying at the guest house for 2 days. One of the days you're going to go up the mountain and do the hike. And after that hike, when you come back down, it's going to be around 8 in the morning, 9 in the morning, and it's time to visit the monastery. So the monastery is only open for 2.5 hours a day, 5 days a week. It's closed on Fridays and Sundays. And during that time, there's so much to see. The burning bush from the story of Moses is located within the walls of the monastery. There's a church that was built in the 500s AD. And there is also a really cool museum that's filled with icons and the oldest Bible in the world, located within the walls of the monastery. And two people that have passed through here that are very important, that should probably be mentioned, are Napoleon Bonaparte. Absolutely loved this monastery, visited several times, and was one of the biggest benefactors in the history of the monastery. And two, the Prophet Muhammad passed through several times, stayed here several times. So this has been a confluence not just of Christians, but of Muslim leaders, world powers. A lot of people have passed through this monastery. After visiting the monastery, I recommend heading down to the town of Dahab. In South Sinai, there are two very popular resort cities. There's Dahab and Sharm el-Sheikh. While a lot of people head to Sharm el-Sheikh, it's become very big and commercialized, and it's really not much more than beach resorts. And personally,
Okay.
when I travel to a new place, I feel like there's beaches where I'm from, and I like to explore more than just relaxing on a beach. So
Okay.
the town of Dahab is much more known for its natural wonders that are located around. Firstly, there's the Colored Canyon. It's very similar to the Antelope Canyon located in Arizona in the US.
Okay.
You pass through about a 2 mile gorge. There are walls on either side that are about 160 feet high that are just riddled with colors, from greens to blues to reds to purples. And this really stands out because in the Sinai Desert, it's a lot of sand, and the mountains are really not much more than brown and some shades of red. So to see these vast colors is really wondrous.
I came out of the pandemic with a bank of unused airline points and a desire to do more travel. But finding cheap flights and points and miles award space can be tough. Wouldn't it be great to get alerts when flight prices drop or when there are deals on that business class seat I really want? Thrifty Traveler Premium does just that. They find the best deals from over 200 US and Canadian departure airports. Thrifty Traveler's flight deal experts are searching 24/7 for flight deals so you don't have to. These deals are bookable with cash or with points and miles from coach to first class. So some recent deals that I thought were interesting: New York City for under $248 coast to coast. Amsterdam and Paris from 36,000 miles, and San Francisco to Honolulu for 31,000 miles in first class. Never miss another incredible award deal by subscribing to Thrifty Traveler Premium. Use the code AT10 for $10 off your first year at thriftytraveler.com/premium. That's thriftytraveler.com/premium and the code AT10. And thanks to Thrifty Traveler for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Another one of the most popular things to do in Dahab is to explore the Blue Hole. The Blue Hole is one of the most famous dive sites in the world, and it's located just about a 10-minute drive from downtown Dahab. It's especially famous because there's no current that passes through, and it's just a straight down drop about 300 feet right off the coast. So literally, you can walk into the ocean and start your dive right off of the shelf of the coast, which is pretty wild. And there are a lot of different species of coral and fish, and it's one of the most vibrant places to dive in the whole world, let alone in the Middle East.
Now,
Another
my
very
impression
popular.
is this is going to be better for divers than snorkelers, for instance.
You would think that, but that's not the case. It's actually a very popular snorkeling place as well, because
Oh,
the depth of the hole is so sudden to where around the rim of the hole, it's very shallow water. You have great snorkeling that's only about 10 or 15 feet deep around the rim of the hole. But then
Got
if you
it.
swim
Okay.
into the middle, it's a very popular place to dive. But the wildlife species and the coral are on full display around the rim as well.
Okay. Interesting.
Yep. Another very popular place around Dahab to go is the Magic Lake. So while the Dead Sea is located a little bit further northeast, the Magic Lake has a similar effect. It's much smaller than the Dead Sea, but
Hmm.
this lake located right in Dahab has the same properties. You float without the need to swim, the healing properties of the salt water. Very popular place to go.
Got it.
One other very popular place to go in Dahab is the Blue Lagoon, which is really nothing too exciting compared to the Blue Hole and the Colored Canyon, but it is some of the clearest water you'll ever see. The Red Sea is not aptly named because this water is crystal clear despite being in the Red Sea.
Hmm.
And it is a perfect day to just relax in the sun, see some fish swimming by, and enjoy time on the beach.
Now, the pictures I'm seeing is we're getting pebbly beaches rather than sandy beaches and really clear water. Am I in the right
You are
mental picture?
absolutely on the right track. It reminded
Okay.
me of Italy the whole time there. A lot
Okay.
of people that travel to Italy expect beautiful beaches, and when they arrive, it's the type of surface where in the water you need shoes. It's uncomfortable to walk into the water in Italy, and it's a very similar thing in Sinai. And a lot of that is because of all the volcanic rock and the mountainous
Hmm.
rock in the area. The hotel we stayed at, which was Le Méridien in Dahab, actually had a jetty that jutted out into the water past this shelf of pebbly sand in the water. And then you could walk down a ladder into the ocean where it was nice, soft sand.
Okay. Yeah. Usually, when you get the clear water, it's because there's not a lot of sand. So I mean, that's the cost of that clarity, as it were.
Yeah, the sand is not very nice at all anywhere in the entire area. You can go up and down the coast, and it's not going to be the fine sand you imagine in the Caribbean.
Hmm.
But the water honestly rivals some of the most popular beaches in the Caribbean.
Cool. Okay.
Sharm el-Sheikh. And
Got
then
it.
from Dahab, we're going to head down to Sharm el-Sheikh to head to the airport, which is where we're going to fly back to Cairo and eventually fly home.
What surprised you about Egypt? This was your first trip?
It was our first trip to Egypt, yeah. I think the thing that surprised us the most is just that some of the negative connotations we had heard or expected honestly did not exist in our experience. We had heard things about how Egypt isn't very safe, and honestly, we felt extremely safe the entire time. We had heard that there are hecklers all over the Giza Plateau. We didn't encounter any. We had heard the Giza Plateau is very busy and occupied and loud and crowded, and it wasn't when we visited. I think a lot of that is a product of visiting during the low season, but I think a lot of it too is just getting up early in the morning, getting there before the massive crowds arrive, because a
Sure.
big part of traveling is if you go to a popular tourist destination, there are going to be crowds. And if you can do anything to beat those crowds, you should do it.
Yeah, I was in Giza with a big bus trip, my one and only big bus trip. Not something I do again, and some listeners of the show were part of that as well. But because of that, I think we got a little later start. It's just hard to get people going when you've got 40 people that you're trying to corral. So I think we were there a little later than you were, a little more busy, although I don't remember that being that hectic. Most of my pictures of Giza are people from our group rather than 12 other groups or something like that. But there were other places that were more hectic, like the markets in Egypt and full on sell you something mode from the vendors there that were much more assertive. I was going to say aggressive, but aggressive isn't really the right term. Assertive, let's say. And then, of course, the traffic was interesting. It was a place where I closed my eyes quite a few times in the taxi ride to our hotel.
Yeah, and I think I remember from that previous episode, you visited in 2010, correct?
Yeah, way back before the Arab Spring.
Yeah, whoa, that's actually a really great experience, I think. But I think something that may have changed is with my visit being in 2023, I don't know if this is the aftermath of the pandemic or what it was, but a lot of these things that we heard about Egypt, whether it was the terrible traffic or the aggressive
Right.
sellers, whatever it may be, we encountered none of that. We had read ahead of time, it's hard to even cross the street in some parts of Cairo. We didn't
Hmm.
have that experience. We read that the sellers are very ready to sell their wares and very ready to tell you why you should buy their wares. And we didn't have that experience. If we said no, people walked away. So we had a very different experience from what I had heard before we went. And I'll admit, before we traveled, I was pretty apprehensive. We've traveled to 50 countries, but I kept reading these, I don't want to say negative, but negative things about traveling in Egypt, things that were a little bit off-putting. And honestly, in our experience, it doesn't apply. It was very safe as far as we felt.
Yeah, and I always discount a little bit how we feel about safe or not. I think statistics usually work a little better than that. But we do need to bring up safety because you were in Sinai, and I realized just before we started recording this, there's kind of a war going on just a little north of that. And I don't think that would keep me right now from going to Sinai, which is in a different country that's not currently, at least, involved in the war in Gaza, which is what's going on as we're recording this. But you were saying that there was quite a lot of security on your trip.
Yes, it is true that the Sinai Peninsula borders Israel and Gaza. It is, in fact, the only land border with Gaza that's not in Israel is in the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt.
Right.
With that being said, the Sinai Peninsula is very secure. Egyptian authorities take security very seriously in this region. On the drive from Cairo to Mount Sinai alone, which is a 5.5-hour drive, you pass through 6 or 7 checkpoints that are staffed with military. They're asking for your passports, your credentials. Every car gets stopped. As you head to Mount Sinai and you actually get into the town, there's another security checkpoint that's run by the local Bedouin tribes. And they make you open up all of your suitcases, all of your bags, empty your pockets, walk through a metal detector. And to some, that might feel off-putting. But to us, it was actually very comforting because we know that if we were being put through the ringer, everybody else probably is too. And we felt very secure with all of the checkpoints. And while the Israel border is only about 3 hours away and the border crossing with Gaza is about 5 hours away from Mount Sinai, it feels like a whole world apart. And the U.S. State Department actually feels similarly because they split the peninsula in half. So they say that the northern half of the Sinai Peninsula should not be visited. It's like an off-limit zone. But the southern half, they say, is perfectly safe to visit. I believe it's a Category 1 or 2 at present, which is
interesting.
Comparable to Western European countries, comparable to Canada. So they make a big distinction between the north and the southern half of the peninsula. And personally, despite everything going on, I would go back right now.
Okay. If you had more time, I constrained you to a 1-week itinerary, what would you add to your itinerary?
I would absolutely go down to Upper Egypt and visit Luxor and Aswan. That's something we did not have time to do. Again, as I said, we opted to go east instead of south. But there is so much beauty to explore in Upper Egypt. Again, that's south down the Nile. In Luxor and Aswan, we heard so many great things. The Temple of Luxor and the Valley of the Kings especially were things that we really wanted to check out. And we do plan on visiting in a future trip.
Sure. Excellent. What kind of questions have I forgotten to ask that you've got a good answer for?
Getting through the border. That's something that I think a lot of people are unfamiliar with. A very popular way to get into Egypt is by going through the visa on arrival process, which is actually a little bit confusing when you get into the Cairo airport.
Yes,
I've done visa on arrival in a lot of places, and Egypt was the strangest of them all. When you land in Cairo, you can't just proceed to the immigration counter. You have to stop before you get to the immigration counter, make a hard right, and go to a bank counter where you actually buy your visa in cash. So it's really important to know if you're traveling to Egypt, you need to bring cash. Now, you could hit an ATM in the airport if you didn't have cash on you, but obviously you're going to be paying fees and conversion rates. Whereas if you just bring $25 in cash is the current going rate for a visa, you walk up to a bank counter, you just pay them the cash, they look at your passport, they give you a sticker, and then when you go up to the immigration line, the immigration agent will take the sticker, put it in your passport, and give it the stamp of approval. And this was an interesting thing to us because, again, we've had visa on arrival in several countries.
Sure.
But I don't think we've ever had to go to a bank counter. That was different. It was different. Yeah.
I remember being a little confused by that process as well.
Yeah.
Now, so one thing different about your travels, and you brought it up here, but I'm sure that you've been told on more than one occasion you must be crazy because you're traveling with a toddler. As you say, it probably changes your pace, if nothing else. How did that change your experience in Egypt, though?
That's a great question. So, firstly, I'll say the name of our website is The Present Perspective, and that's because we aim to live in the present. And I think having
Hmm.
kids has especially helped us to do that. We started this website before we had kids, and we really focused on living in the moment and traveling slowly and trying to learn all that we could about destinations that we visited. But
Hmm.
having kids just completely changes that perspective, and it really forces you to slow down, which is a beautiful thing. As far as Egypt goes, I was amazed at how much he wanted to explore. At the pyramids, him just waddling around, and we took him on a camel ride. I know that's questionable, but the camels at the place that we visited looked very healthy. We had that moral consideration before the ride.
Hmm.
And I think just as we explored, it really opened my eyes to the fact that so many parents choose not to travel with their children, which is a great decision. It is
Hmm.
taxing and it is stressful, so it's definitely not the wrong call. But I think as we traveled with him, we
Hmm.
didn't bring a stroller. We carried him or he walked the entire time. And we were amazed at how much he really can do, how much he really didn't slow us down any more than we wanted to be slowed down. Whether that was walking through the tight streets of Cairo, or that was going swimming in the Red Sea, or even hiking up Mount Sinai. Kids a lot of times do really great when you bring them on adventures. And I think the things that he'll learn as we continue to travel with him. Now, to be
Hmm.
fair, he's only 2, so I don't know how much he's soaking in at this point. But in the
Yeah,
future,
he
as we
probably
continue to
won't
take him
remember
on our
this, but
trips, right,
yeah.
he definitely won't, but we will. And I think that's part of the beauty as well. But I
Yep.
think as we continue to travel with him and our future children, it opens their eyes to so much beauty in the world. And so many Americans don't even leave the country throughout their lives. And there are many reasons for that. And it's not wrong to not leave the US. But I
Hmm.
think there are so many new perspectives and so many new aspects of life to learn through travel, cultural nuances, language, so many different things. When we take him on our trips, it causes us to reflect on those things ourselves because we think about what he's learning and what he's soaking in, and that slowness helps us to soak it in as well.
My father always said if you wanted to meet people when you move to a new neighborhood, you should have a baby or a dog.
I think that's a
But
great point.
excellent. As we start to wrap this up, anything else people need to know before they take a trip to Egypt and follow in your footsteps?
There are a lot of dishes you need to try, but one dish that you absolutely need to try is koshari. It's incredible. It is a hodgepodge of different things thrown together, and the best place to get it is at Abu Tarak in Cairo. This dish is like rice and pasta and a tomato base and spicy sauce. It's vegetarian, and we had no idea what this was going to taste like, but we heard we had to try it, and it blew us away. We love food when we travel, and this has become one of my favorite foods.
And I don't know that. One of the disadvantages of doing the bus trip is you only eat places where they can handle 40 people. That's why I don't
Yeah,
do
and
those anymore.
on that topic, another thing that I recommend, I am normally not the kind of person who goes for a guide.
Okay.
Normally, when I travel, I prefer to be guide free. I think it's more lightweight. And I really debated hiring guides or not hiring guides during our time in Egypt, especially in Cairo, because in South Sinai, it's compulsory for a lot of excursions. If you want to go to the Colored
Hmm.
Canyon or Mount Sinai, you have to have a guide. It's the local regulation. But I hired a guide for each excursion that we did in Cairo, and I am so grateful that I did. Not
Hmm.
just from a safety perspective or from a lot of people say if you hire a guide, you won't be heckled as much by people trying to sell things. And those statements are probably true.
Hmm.
But I think just the ease with which you can get around when you have a guide. Cairo is a hectic city, and the Giza Plateau is a lot bigger than people think. So if you don't have a car on the Giza Plateau, you will not be able to see everything. It is miles apart. To get from the Great Pyramid to the Sphinx is probably over a mile, and it gets pretty hot out in Cairo. So I think hiring a guide is a really big advantage to any trip to Cairo, and it's pretty affordable too.
So I am a big proponent actually of hiring a guide. And Egypt is one of those places where there is so much history, there is so much to know. Unless you happen to be an Egyptologist, I think you're going to miss something. If you are someone who likes to learn. Now, if you're just there for the Instagram picture, then you probably don't need it. I'm one of those people who wants to go home understanding a little better. So for me, a guide is very helpful, especially in a place like like Cairo, especially in a place like Egypt.
I fully agree. And I think that's a lesson I've learned over my travels as well. One place that really comes to mind is Chichen Itza in Mexico. Very similar
Hmm.
concept to the pyramids in Giza, where there's so much to learn, so many different structures to learn about. And the first time that I visited Chichen Itza, we didn't take a guide. We didn't hire a guide. And it was pretty. It was nice. We explored. We were there for a couple of hours and we left. We
Hmm.
went back again and we hired a guide, and we were just floored by the amount of things that we could learn. And again, we enjoy history, but we're not history buffs. We're not
Hmm.
historians. And I think that the pyramids of Giza are a place where, even if you're not particularly interested in history, the history that you can learn is so valuable and so digestible by
Hmm.
hiring a guide.
And the other advantage for me, too, is that you're putting money into the local economy. That's never a bad thing either.
Never a
Excellent.
bad thing.
As we get to our wrap-up questions, you're standing in the prettiest spot you saw in Egypt. Where are you standing and what are you looking at?
I'm standing on the peak of Mount Sinai looking out in the distance, watching the moon set on one side and the sun rise on the other.
Thought perhaps that might be your answer. One thing that makes you laugh and say only in Egypt.
People asking for tips going through airport security.
Okay, I did not experience that. We ran into the bakshish, the tip for services rendered, many places, but not airport security. Interesting. Or I've forgotten about it. Maybe that's the case. Wow. Okay.
We expected more bakshish, but we didn't encounter too many opportunities of people oddly asking us for some bakshish. But in the airport in Sharm el-Sheikh, when we were flying back to Cairo, the person that put our bags on the belt, and they were light bags, these are backpacks. They put our backpacks on the belt, and it was an official doing it, looked at us afterwards and put the hand out and wanted a little bit of bakshish, as they say.
Although I say I've forgotten that, it just occurs to me that my wife tells a story that I had forgotten that happened where we were in the airport, and I think it was Cairo, and our bags went through some sort of screening process, and the guard or whoever it was wanted me to pay something or wanted me to go someplace, and I was like, no, my bag went that way, I am going that way. And she said it was very assertive, and they let me do what I was trying to do, and I don't remember the incident at all. It's just one of those things that gets lost in 70 countries of travel or something like that, all those little tiny moments where you just needed to use a little bit of, nope, this is what I'm going to do. So, interesting. If you had to summarize the country of Egypt in just 3 words, what 3 words would you use, Greg?
Hospitality,
Okay.
beauty, timelessness.
Okay. Excellent. As we said, Greg from thepresentperspective.com. And Greg, if we want to send people to your best post on Egypt, where are we going to send them?
It's going to be my post about hiking Mount Sinai. It is one of the most legendary experiences you'll ever have, and my post gives you everything you need to know about how to book at the guest house, which I highly recommend doing, the best time to hike, everything to know about the hike. I would say
Excellent.
heading to that post.
We'll put that link in the show notes as soon as you write it and send it to me. But I also have enjoyed the photography on your website too, so I'm sure people enjoy that as well. Greg, thanks so much for coming on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love for Egypt.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
A special thanks to the patrons of the show who help support Amateur Traveler financially. They get the show a little early, they get a monthly Zoom call, and some other tchotchkes depending on the level that they sign up for. If you're interested in learning more, go to patreon.com/amateurtraveler. I don't have any news from the community here, so this would have been where your feedback was had I gotten it. So send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com with your comments. There's still some space on the trip to Morocco in April. Looking forward to that trip and to seeing some of you for the first time and seeing some of you again. If you're interested in learning more about that, go to amateurtraveler.com/trips. And with that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.